Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the show. The ongoing situation in Ottawa and at Ambassador Bridge is obviously continuing into the weekend, and it's expected to continue into a little bit of the next week as well. Joining me now to discuss this and more is Glen McGregor, journalist in the Parliamentary Press Gallery for CTV National News. Glen, thanks for joining me. Let's start out with, obviously, again, the ongoing situation in Ottawa. What's kind of the latest happening in Ottawa, and maybe just speak a little bit about what it's been like covering the story for the last 17 days.
Sure. So what's happening in Ottawa today is the protests continue. They are still kind of gridlocked large areas of downtown, and the protesters are very dug in. They have now have a giant jumbotron, which they possibly would be using to watch the Super Bowl tonight. They have dance parties every night within this, what the police call the red zone. There's live music, fireworks. They even have hot tubs right out in front of the Prime Minister's office that they're taking a soak in. We earlier in the protests, we'd also seen saunas at one point that people had brought in on the backs of trucks. So they are encamped, and they really don't show any signs of leaving. They think they are going to stay here. The group that is left during the week kind of changes from who is here on the weekend. So this is the third weekend of the protests. At its height on 3 Saturdays past, police estimated about 18,000 people were there. The following Saturday, about 7, and we heard estimates from police of about 4,000 yesterday. So the numbers are kind of falling a little bit. But what happens is when those people go home on the weekends, there's this core group that remains, and they are much more devoted to the cause, I think, and they say they are not going to leave unless all COVID mandates are scrapped, and that would include not just the vaccination requirement for cross-border truckers, which supposedly inspired this, but things like restaurant vaccination passports you need to show to get into a bar or restaurant, which of course is a provincial measure, as well as lockdowns, again, provincial and municipal issues, and also mask mandates, again, provincial. So their complaints are kind of not just at the federal government, but at COVID mandates in general. And they say they aren't going to leave until all of them are gone. So we're at a bit of a standoff because that's not going to happen. The federal government isn't going to do that. They may start relaxing some mandates that they were going to do anyway. Next week, we expect they will formalize the announcement that they are going to end the requirement for people coming into Canada, travelers, to take a PCR test and instead only require a rapid test. It's important because those PCR tests, you have to get them to the United States, and I've had to do it a couple of times. They're expensive, $150. In order to get your results fast enough, you have to get it within 72 hours of travel. So it'll be a little bit less of a burden. You know, people want to go down, take their kids to Disney World, maybe, family of 4. That's a big hit. That's over a Canadian, $1,000 added on to the cost of your trip. So that measure is going to be scrapped. But the government has been facing a lot of pressure to do that for months, not in response to these protests. So they want to be careful that they're not sending anyone the message that when they change some of the COVID rules, when they loosen them and relax them, that it's not because they're going to tell you because of the protests, but because the medical science said it's okay to start doing that now.
You mentioned some of the measures that, they're protesting about, the mask mandates and some of the vaccination mandates to go into restaurants and other select indoor facilities fall under provincial jurisdiction. The government of Ontario declared a state of emergency over the situation, not just in Ottawa, but also at Ambassador Bridge. What's been the response to that from some of these protesters? Does this state of emergency that was declared by the provincial government, is this, something that could persuade them to leave, or are they still staying there for as long as they can?
Well, the ones we've talked to, and sometimes it's hard to get people to talk to you because the component of this is they really don't like what they see as, the legacy media or mainstream media, and it's often difficult to get people to tell you their opinions. But the ones we have talked to say, no, it doesn't matter to them. They are willing to risk tickets. And keep in mind, these aren't just traffic tickets. These are fines under the state of emergency that the Ford government declared. These are fines of up to $100,000 and potentially 1 year in jail. Serious penalties, to be sure, would be financially devastating for a lot of these people if that fine was imposed upon them. But they're confident this is not going to happen. They believe that they will win in court if it ever gets to that point. They also believe that a lot of them believe that the police are with them, and the police won't move in and start imposing those fines. Now, we've seen one or two arrests. I think maybe it was 2 arrests today in Windsor, Ontario, when the Windsor police, in cooperation with the OPP, moved in and cleared those protests around the Ambassador Bridge. But there has not been a lot of enforcement in the sense of people being arrested, their vehicles towed. We have seen none of that here in Ottawa. There have been some criminal charges, but there are things like driving without a license or uttering threats, things like that. We haven't seen yet any signs that the police here in Ottawa are going to use these new powers that the Ford government has given them temporarily to act against these protests. And it's causing, I got to say, a lot of puzzlement, a lot of anger here in Ottawa. We're seeing now counter protests, large counter protests, forming a big group formed in the south end of the city today and marched and had kind of a standoff trying to block one of the convoys of trucks that was heading somewhere else. And the police tried to intervene and asked the local residents who were protesting against this to stand down, and they didn't. So that's kind of an ongoing situation. I think you're going to see more of that because the frustration here with the police force is absolutely at an all-time high. People, I just cannot understand why they're seeing the protesters seeming to act with impunity. I mean, not just breaching local bylaws like parking tickets and blocking intersections. Those are things you can't be necessarily arrested for, at least before the Ford state of emergency was declared. You get a ticket for that generally, and if you're out of the province, you could probably get away with crumpling it up and throwing it away. But the thing that really galls people is to see these protesters bringing in jerry cans filled with diesel fuel they need to keep their big rigs running and keep them warm, and the police seeming to do nothing. And the police have said, they've told us, "Oh, we're gonna stop that," but they don't seem to. So I think it's just that is the really thing that is really angering this community, that their law enforcement seems to have given up. And the reason we're led to believe is that they just don't have the numbers to start enforcing that. And if you stop somebody from bringing jerry cans in, that could potentially trigger a confrontation, and police very much want to avoid that. One of the characteristics of this protest is that a large number of the protesters have brought their children with them. The police estimate that 25% of the trucks on Parliament Hill have children living in them. I mean, like not in school, actually in the trucks. And that creates enormous complexity for whatever the planned police response will be, because in a typical like a riot situation, when police move in to quell an angry protest, they often will use things like tear gas to dispel rioters. They can't do that here because you have so many children. So in a way, the protesters have effectively created a kind of a shield for themselves against that kind of response. The police are talking about bringing in the Children's Aid Society, but again, that gets very difficult in how you do that. And they also do not want to antagonize the protesters even further. You can imagine what the reaction would be if we saw images on the news of police taking children away from protesters. That would be highly inflammatory, even if it were required in certain cases. So this is just it's kind of a deadlock right now, and no one honestly here seems to be able at any level of government articulate a way of how they think this can or will end.
And then just one final question before we conclude. To what extent the state of emergency was declared by the provincial government, but to what extent does the city of Ottawa play a role in actually enforcing it, or is it, more so the provincial government that plays the role to enforce it?
Right. Well, so the state of emergency is issued, in this case, was issued by the provincial government. And they also put in the cabinet at the same time, passed some of these rules that would give the police more power to effect arrests and tow trucks and those kinds of things. But those rules, those laws will be binding on any law enforcement agency in the province, primarily the Ontario Provincial Police, and also the city police here in Ottawa. And it's not just Ottawa's police forces here. There are police from multiple other communities across the province that have seconded their members to do law enforcement here in Ottawa. So I'm walking around the streets. I see people from the London Police Service. We see them from Peel region, near Toronto, Durham region, east of Toronto. So there's a lot of different police forces here, but they will all have now that power to act accordingly that was set by the provincial government through these emergency measures, but they haven't again. So the Ottawa police are still, in theory, in control of the response. That is, these extra police who've come in from other communities have been kind of deputized in to do law enforcement in Ottawa, but the Ottawa police are still in control. This morning, though, we heard that they were establishing kind of a joint command center with the RCMP, and we don't really know, trying to read the signs of whether or not that means the RCMP is now going to take a more active role in directing the police response, or whether or not it's still going to be left with the Ottawa police and their chief, Peter Slowly, who is tremendously under fire now, and a lot of speculation here about whether or not he will be allowed to remain in that job going forward, even once this is over. I don't think there's any chance they're going to yank him out right now, but his future in this city is certainly in doubt, and I mean, in large part because this entire affair has really caused people in Ottawa to question the effectiveness of their law enforcement agency, and really starting to raise doubts about whether our police force here in Ottawa can protect this community. And that is not a good place to be.
All right, that is the CTV's Glen McGregor. Glen, thanks so much for chatting with me, and it's been great chatting with you. And thank you again for bringing my viewers up to speed on some of the latest events happening in Ottawa.
My pleasure, Wyatt. Thank you.